On the night of September 3rd, 1989, a Boeing 737 carrying 54 passengers and crew members vanished into the night sky over Brazil, never to be seen again. Despite calm weather, a perfectly functioning aircraft, and active communication with air traffic control, the flight never reached its destination. What happened in those final, fateful moments remains one of aviation's most perplexing mysteries. The journey began that evening. 48 passengers boarded a Varig Airlines Boeing 737 in Maraba, Brazil, for a brief flight to Belém, a city near the mouth of the Amazon River. The flight was supposed to take only 40 minutes, nothing out of the ordinary for the seasoned crew and the aircraft, which had completed several successful stops earlier in the day. But as the plane ascended into the night sky, a series of mistakes and miscommunications would soon spiral into a terrifying crisis. The crew at the helm of Flight 254 was Captain Cesar Augusto Padula Garces, a 32-year-old pilot with nearly 7,000 flight hours. Alongside him was 28-year-old First Officer Nelson de Souza Zile, a relative newcomer to the skies, with just 800 hours of flying experience, half of which was spent in the Boeing 737. Their aircraft, a Boeing 737-200, was a reliable workhorse for the airline, and this was supposed to be the crew's final flight of the day. But as they prepared for takeoff, a critical error was made, and neither pilot would realize it until it was far too late. The takeoff at 5:30 p.m., the aircraft began its takeoff from Maraba. Passengers, eager to reach Belém before the sunset, were oblivious to the growing tension in the cockpit. The Brazilian national football team was about to play Chile, and the outcome of that match would soon be the least of anyone's concerns. The flight climbed into the sky without incident, heading toward Belém. But something wasn't right. The first signs of trouble as the plane ascended to 29,000 feet. First Officer Zile attempted to tune into the Belém navigational beacon, hoping to confirm their location, but his instruments didn't respond. While this wasn't entirely unusual given Brazil's patchy aviation infrastructure, the situation was starting to feel strange. Moments later, as they continued their climb, another oddity occurred. Radio communication with Belém's air traffic control failed. Zile tried repeatedly to reach the tower, but there was no response. Eventually, the crew switched to a longer-range radio, only to get connected to a different station, hundreds of miles away. Though they were cleared to descend, the absence of any clear guidance was beginning to create doubts in the pilots' minds. Something was wrong. The growing mystery as they flew on, a troubling realization dawned on them: they couldn't see Belém. The city should have been visible by now, yet all they could see was the endless expanse of the Amazon rainforest. Their navigational equipment seemed to be pointing them in the wrong direction. By now, the passengers were starting to feel uneasy. What was taking so long? Captain Garces decided they must have flown past Belém, hidden by the thick smoke from rainforest fires. So, he turned the aircraft around, hoping to approach the city from the opposite side. But still, there was no sign of Belém. A desperate search for clues in a last-ditch effort, Zile began tuning the plane's radio to local stations, hoping to pick up a signal that could guide them to safety. They managed to catch a faint transmission from Radio Liberal station in Belém. The automatic direction finder ADF needle pointed directly at it, seemingly a sign that they were heading in the right direction. But even as they followed the signal, there was still no sign of the city. The pilots pressed on, now flying low over the jungle at night, clinging to hope that they would soon spot the lights of Belém. The shocking revelation: as the plane continued its descent and fuel began to run low, the pilots made a heart-stopping realization: they had been flying in the wrong direction all along. A simple yet catastrophic mistake due to a misprinted flight plan had led them far off course. Instead of flying north toward Belém, they had flown west, deep into the heart of the Amazon rainforest. All along, they had been following the wrong river, mistaking it for a tributary of the Amazon. And the radio signals they had been picking up, they were not from Belém at all, but from a station hundreds of miles south. In a horrifying twist, the pilots had been chasing a phantom. Running out of time, the atmosphere in the cockpit was thick with dread. They were lost. Fuel was rapidly depleting, and there were no signs of civilization in sight. The possibility of a crash in the middle of the jungle seemed more and more inevitable. With no radar or GPS to rely on, the pilots were completely alone, depending only on outdated navigational equipment and their fading instincts. As the hours ticked by, it became clear, if they didn't find their way soon, their next stop would be a tragic crash. A last-ditch effort and one final desperate bid, Captain Garces climbed the aircraft to a higher altitude, hoping to conserve fuel and improve visibility. After what seemed like an eternity of searching, Zyle found some charts that might help pinpoint their location. The ADF needles finally swung into life, pointing south toward an airport Horatius far from Belém, but a potential safe landing spot. The pilots informed air traffic control of their new course, but there was no turning back. They had been lost for too long. The aircraft's fuel was nearly exhausted. The tragic Endus Flight 254 made its way toward Horatius. The pilots' worst fears were realized. They didn't have enough fuel to make it. The plane ran out of fuel and crashed into the dense Amazon rainforest. All 54 passengers and crew perished. What went wrong? The root of this tragedy was simple. A tiny oversight at the beginning of the flight. A misinterpreted heading led the pilots astray. The rest of the errors, each seemingly minor on its own, compounded over time until they reached a fatal conclusion. This tragedy highlights how small mistakes in aviation can snowball into catastrophic outcomes, and how crucial it is for every pilot to stay vigilant, even in the face of seemingly mundane details. The disappearance of Varig Flight 254 remains one of the most haunting aviation mysteries to this day. The tragic loss of life could have been prevented had the pilots recognized their mistakes in time. It serves as a stark reminder of the human element in aviation, where even the smallest lapse in attention can lead to disaster.